This time last year, I was able to sit here and tell you that I had the world's most accurate mock draft, and this year, I can't do that. But not because I don't, simply because Fantasypros hasn't released the results yet. But with round one done, I do at least know that I came in the top 10 of the Huddle Report competition, which is scored a little bit differently. I'm going to take you through the whole NFL draft first round, give you some scores, and we can have a look at how my mocks lined up on the Fantasy First Down. So let me run you through what's happening here. On the left-hand side, you've got the actual pick that occurred. Next to it, you've got my grade. And then the picks that I had for the two draft competitions I went in. The first is the Huddle Report, which rewards points based on picking the player and them going in the first round for 1 point, and then 2 points for picking the player to the correct team. I believe that I ended up with 28 players going in the first round of my 32, and I believe I had about 8 of them going to the correct team, which put me in 8th. I did make a last-minute change. If I hadn't made that change, I would have ended up in 3rd, which is a little bit frustrating. In the Fantasy Pros one, points are far more complicated. You get points based on how close you are to their actual draft position, based on how close you are to where they rank within the other players of their position. You get points if you send the player to the right team, and also points if you have the team selecting the correct position. So let's get things started with pick number 1. And Fernando Mendoza, this was always going to happen. It's a good pick. He was the number 1 pick and he needed to be for the Raiders. They can now build from there. There's nothing to talk about here. But number 2 is where it got interesting. The bookmakers had Arvell Reese as the heavy favourite, but everyone I was talking to had David Bailey, and it makes a heap of sense. Far safer option. What the Jets need right now. You know what you're getting with him. He definitely knows how to pass rush because he's had a couple more years in college football. Arvell Reese is going to take quite a while to build up and get to a point where he's going to be helpful for an NFL team. And frankly, I just don't think the Jets brass can wait that long. So I think they made the correct choice at 2. At 3, another one that I talked about in a heap of videos, plus on the World Football Show, and you can check out the recap I did over there as well. This is one that we knew about when the odds are about 5-1, 6-1, so won quite a lot of money on this one. Jeremiah Love going to the Cardinals because the owner came over the top of the staff and decided that he definitely wanted Love. I really question this pick. I think this is a terrible choice. They already had James Conner, Tyler Algier, and Trey Benson, and while none of them are special, they didn't have a run game to speak of regardless because the O-line wasn't good enough and because the pass game wasn't good enough. So there's no real point of getting a running back when you can't use them effectively anyway. This could be literally any running back in the league, and they're going to be totally useless to you because you don't have the rest of the team to build around. So this is a totally wasted pick. Do not like this. It would be a fail if Love wasn't such a talented player. At least they've gotten themselves one of the best players in the draft. It just doesn't make any sense for where they are at the moment, and I can't rate that highly. At 4, Carnell Tate. I may be a little bit bitter with this pick. I admit it kind of makes sense for them. They do need a wide receiver. They can't go ahead with Calvin Ridley being their number 1 guy. But I would have gone with Jordan Tyson. I think they need a true alpha receiver, and I think Tyson is that guy. Tate, honestly, he was never really even the best player on his team at college. Profile's more of a natural number 2 anyway. Going at 4 seems really early for him. I know this is a weak draft, but I do question the merits of taking him over Tyson. I don't mind them going wide receiver. I just would have put Tyson first. Reese was the guy I had picking in both of the drafts, but I'm okay with the wide receiver. It's just Tate is the wrong one. In at 5, and this really messed me up because I had quite a bit of money on Tyson at 10-1, and that would have been very nice if that had come in. And I have heard since that that would have been the pick if Reese had been taken at 4. They were going Tyson at 5, but Reese falling to them and they just needed to go for it. This seems like a bit of a questionable pick given they have so many edge rushers, but we know that Reese can also play as an inside linebacker, so they can kind of use him as an inside linebacker on early downs and then cycle him through the edge rushing positions on third downs and also give him a rest there as well. I do realize I've misspelled his first name as well. So this is an acceptable pick. I don't mind it. I personally would have still preferred Tyson. I think it made a little bit more sense for where they were at. But Reese is fine, even though he is a little bit more of a project who isn't going to be able to help them immediately. At 6, and this one is a real question mark for me. I do not love this pick at all. The biggest issue I have with this pick is that they traded up for him. And as a Chiefs fan, that makes no sense to me. There were so many needs we had. Could have gone wide receiver, could have gone tight end, could have gone O-tackle. Cornerback was obviously a need as well. And even an edge rusher would have been useful as well. There's not really one available. Having said that, if you're going to go get an edge rusher, go up with the Giants and go properly and go and get Arvell Reese, or even go up to the Titans. I just don't think this made any sense. I think Delane's probably available at 9, and even if he's not, just sit there, and a player that is useful to you will be. One of the tackles will be available there. Even edge rusher Ruben Bain, who I had mocked them in both of my drafts, would have made more sense there. Instead, they go Delane. I did expect a team to trade up here. I had it as being the Cowboys to go and get Sonny Styles, and I think I would have considered that to be a reasonable move. Do not love this one, though, even though Delane is clearly the best cornerback in this draft class. If they'd just taken Delane at 9, I'm probably giving it a B plus region, maybe even an A-. But taking him here, giving up a 3rd and a 5th round pick, that is way too much. At 7, Sonny Styles, good pick, makes perfect sense. We did know that Tate was probably going to be the pick if he was available. That news had come in the last day or so from Charlie Campbell over at World of Football. Having said that, I think Styles also made a heap of sense, and we did know that it was down to these two guys. Unfortunately, the Chiefs didn't know that. If they'd known that, it wouldn't need to jump over the Commanders. So Styles is a very solid pick. I don't really know there's any other player I would have suggested them take over him. Maybe Jordan Tyson, but it's not exactly a desperate need. I do think they needed to replace Bobby Wagner and get their number 1 linebacker position sorted. Sonny Styles has enough talent. Plus, he also can rush the passer when needed as well, so I think he gives them a little bit of flair there too. So I do like this pick. Very solid, but not as much as I like pick number 8, Jordan Tyson. Would have been happy to see him go at 5. We saw Carnell Tate go at 4, and the Saints get themselves an absolute bargain. They do not need a number 1 receiver because they've got Chris Olave, but he's injured half the time anyway. So Tyson going here is very useful to them, gives Tyler Shock another weapon. Love this pick for them. I thought that it could potentially be Tate at 2. I gave them in the Huddle Report one, but Downs was someone that got mocked to them quite a lot as well, and I had heard rumours that he's a guy they liked, but not from the most trustworthy of sources, and that was news that came a while back anyway. I do know that the bookies certainly had Tyson going here at pretty good odds, but I thought he was going at 5, so there's no point putting him here. Very sensible pick. Love this for the Saints. One of my favourite picks in the whole draft. Now, at 9, things get a little bit more interesting because somehow I managed to nail this pick in the Fantasypros mock, more through fluke than anything else. I did know Fano was the guy that the Browns really liked. While they talked about Proctor and Mauanoa a little bit, Fano was the main guy. Such a clean prospect, real leader for their locker room, someone they can build around. Fantastic pick. The fact that they were able to trade back 3 spots was even better. I do think they potentially could have traded even a little bit more if they'd tried to, but you never know with the Giants sitting there. I did believe that the Giants preferred Mauanoa over Fanu, so they probably could have gone back even to 10, but didn't really make sense to do that and take that risk. So going to 9 made perfect sense. Fanu is a great pick here. Love this. It realistically could have even given this an A+. Very smart work getting that day 2 and day 3 pick as well. Expected it to be Bain here with the Chiefs, but I was pretty confident that Fanu wouldn't get all the way back to 12. So I originally had the Browns trading back to 12 and then trading back up again to 9, which I think is the other way they could have done it. They probably would have gotten a little bit more capital if they'd done it that way because of how the picks would have worked out. But I do like what they've done here nonetheless. In at 10, and Francis Mauanoa, I've seen this be panned by quite a few people, and I did originally have Delane going there, and I think that would have made a lot of sense, but that's clearly not an option. I think Tyson would have been fantastic, and I think it's disappointing they didn't get him earlier, But based on everything else they've done, I don't know what else they could have done here. They could have gone Caleb Downs potentially, but I like Noah better than Downs. He's actually a true need for them. I think they slot him in at right tackle or potentially at guard initially and then slide him across to right tackle. I know there is some risk here with the back injury, but from everything I've heard, this is not a serious thing. This is more of a cleanup that he's going to need to get done at some point in time. Unlikely to knock him out for an extended period of time. So I think this is a favourable one. Having said that, the injury is the only concern. If it weren't for the injury, this would be an AA plus for me. In fact, he probably wouldn't have made it here if not for the injury. In 11, and Caleb Downs, sort of the range we expected him to be. I think 8 was his ceiling where I had him going to the Saints, but anywhere in this range made a lot of sense. Easily could have gone to the Giants at 10, could have gone to the Chiefs at 9, although they didn't end up picking there, and it wouldn't have been crazy to see Miami take him at 11. In fact, I think that's what the Cowboys were worried about. That's why they traded up. Miami, of course, was equally happy with Caden Proctor. In fact, the news I had going into the draft was that the Dolphins would probably go Proctor, but they did like Downs, and they also didn't mind Bain either, so that if Downs was there, they might have selected him. So the fact that it actually came down to that, and the Cowboys felt the same and traded up, was really interesting. So Downs ends up going to the Cowboys. Makes sense. We had heard news that they were looking for a safety. They do tend to play with 3 safeties a lot. So even though they've got Jalen Thompson and Malik Hooker, it makes sense to add Downs as well. He can also play as that nickelback if they need him to. Very smart guy for their secondary. And Caden Proctor, great pick for Alabama as well. Realistically, I think this could be an A-plus pick, but I'm not convinced on Proctor. It's probably the best player available for them, but I would have been okay with them staying at 11 and taking Downs as well. In fact, I think they probably would have taken Proctor there, and then I would have graded this worse. I'm not convinced by Proctor. I think they probably could have gone down a little bit more and gotten him, or gone down a heap more, gotten more draft picks, which they need, and gotten a tackle, which is pretty similar. Having said that, I know that Proctor has really risen throughout the process, and if they went too much further down, they were going to get jumped here. So, relatively safe play. Happy with this one. The reason I marked down Downs, by the way, was because they traded up when they probably didn't need to, and because it's not a premium position, but it's still not a bad pick. Proctor is the better pick of those two, though. Then we get to the worst pick in the whole time I've been doing this, basically. Ty Simpson. I know F- is not a thing. It's not here in Australia. I assume it's not in America. But that's how bad it is. It is atrocious. This is similar to that situation where the Falcons went up for Penix when they just given Kirk Cousins a heap of money. I think it was $50 million or something like that. Well, Stafford's being paid $40 million this year. They are a Super Bowl favourite, and they wasted a pick on a guy who is not a particularly good quarterback. He's got 1 year of tape, and it's not fantastic. He might develop into something, but he's not generally a consensus first-round pick. Most teams have a day 2 grade on him, and I do understand with quarterbacks in a weak draft class, that's going to rise, but there's so many other players available that would have made sense. They could have gone O-line. Kenyon Sadiq would have been fantastic. Could have gone Mekhi Lemon, but I've got a story about that for later on as to why teams didn't, which is really interesting. Having said that, I mean, a team was going to take Simpson. Someone was going to make that mistake. You just hate to see it be the Rams because, as a general rule, they draft quite well, but maybe they should just continue to stay out of the first round. This is just an atrocious decision that really limits their likelihood of winning the Super Bowl this year. Plus, I've paid a relatively high amount of money to go and see them in Melbourne. And if they are starting Ty Simpson, I want my money back. Vaguiwane in at 14. Really happy with this pick. There was a big question mark over whether this was going to be Ioane and Sadiq. And when Sadiq was still available, I was very nervous that would be the pick there because I know a lot of very sharp mocks had Sadiq here. But Ioane just makes way more sense for what they're trying to do. Allows them to run the ball a little bit better. I know having another good tight end works, but they can just use a blocking tight end to do that. They've got Mark Andrews as their receiving tight end. That worked for them when they were at their best. I reckon they're probably going to get a wide receiver on day 2, but they needed to improve the O-line. They especially needed a guard, and they did exactly that, getting, without doubt, the best O-line player in the draft. I don't think there's another O-lineman I like better, even though Fanu's a good prospect. I think Ioane's a better player. He just plays at the less premium position, being on the interior. But he is arguably the best player in the draft, definitely the best O-lineman for me, if you assume that all positions along the line are equal. In at 15, Ruben Bain. Bit of a surprise he fell this far. I think the short arms were more the issue rather than the stories of the car crash that happened a few years ago. I think that was a shame that even got brought up. I don't think it had any impact at all. I like Bane, but I did watch enough Miami games, given I had Akeem Messidor in my college fantasy team, to know that those two struggled a little bit when they weren't both out there. It's really easy to look good when you've got a great guy on the opposite side of the line, and they both had that for a lot of the time. Bane, having said that, still has plenty of talent, and he gives the Buccaneers what they need. They needed to get an edge rusher. I do know that they like to keep Mesidor, and I think that if Bane was gone, Mesidor's probably the pick. I had them trading down to get Mesidor because they didn't need to take him here. So the fact that they ended up taking Bane, I think this is a real bargain here. Love this pick for the Bucks. It's exactly what they needed. A plus for them, especially compared to what I had heard they were going to take. Now in at 16, Jets continue a fantastic draft, their second A of the evening. They get Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon. This is a bargain here. Really like this pick. I had him going to the Chiefs here. The Chiefs trading up with their other pick. I think that was unlikely to happen, but I did hear that they might also trade down with their pick as well to get Sadiq, and I think he would have been an interesting fit here. They go to the Jets instead, another team that already has a tight end. There's a lot of two tight end sets going around the league at the moment. Mason Taylor, more of a natural blocker that can move a little bit. So get Sadiq in, who's a willing blocker, but an excellent pass catcher, essentially going in as another wide receiver, which they need because outside Garrett Wilson, at this point in the draft at least, they didn't really have anything. I originally had Downs mocked here as well because I expected a team to try to come in and get Downs, and it's really hard to fit him in anywhere. I think the Saints were always going to be an option at 8, but I mocked them in the Huddle 1 at 16 just so I could get the Saints going to the two options I thought would go to them. That didn't work because they went for a third player in Tyson. Now, if we go to the second half of the first round, and a bit of a shocker for me, not really sure about Blake Miller. I personally would have gone for Freeling here. We'd been told by the Lions that it was likely to be, if they couldn't get Proctor, likely to be Freeling or Keldrick Fork, or potentially even Jamod McCoy before they took him off the board because of the health issues. So the fact they went Blake Miller came as a little bit of a blindside, and I'm quite surprised by it because I had him mocked in the deeper 20s. Having said that, we did know that O-line were going to rise, and you see that happen here. You can see that it's only a couple of picks later that we see Freeling go, and then a couple more for Iheanacho. So it makes sense to take Miller here. He is a fit. He gives them options across the line, which they needed. With Tyler Decker out the door, they needed to take an O-tackle. This was the correct pick. Would have preferred Freeling. That would have given them an A for me. But taking Miller's not tragic because it is a position they needed. At 18, and this is nearly a fail, except for the fact it is a clear need. They did need a defensive tackle in Minnesota. I personally would have preferred to see them take an edge guy that had them going down a little bit to go and get Fork. But in this case, they go for Caleb Banks on the interior. Really risky play here. Injury issues, size issues, play issues, but a heap of talent. Personally, I'd have taken Peter Woods, but they've gone with Banks, and because it's a need, I'm willing to give it to them, but there's so many risks here, and I don't know why they're taking this. I personally would have just traded down when there were going to be a heap of options available. In at 19, and I think this is actually a pretty good pick for the Panthers. Not one I particularly saw coming, although I did see the odds did shift towards offensive linemen in the morning of the draft. I was hoping Sadiq would get to them. I think that would have been a fantastic pick for them because at the moment they can't keep rolling out the likes of Tommy Tremble, as much as I don't mind Jatavian Sanders. And I think Thieneman was an option, but maybe a little bit of a reach. Anytime you take a safety in the first round, you're often taking them a little bit too early if you're taking them where everyone mocks them. So it makes sense that he fell, and it makes sense that they chose not to take him, even though we do know that they liked him. Freeling was just too good to pass up. I do wonder what would have happened if the Lions had taken Freeling. I think possibly that we see Thieneman go here, but they went with Freeling. I like this. It does make me nervous about Ike Ekwonu with that terrible injury, potentially out for the year and maybe longer. We do know that Tepper loves taking anything that's going to help Bryce Young, so this made a heap of sense. At 20, and you would think this would get a very good grade because a lot of people had him going, well, potentially above Jordan Tyson at times. Mackay Lemon. However, he did drop through the process for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Tyson looked a lot better now that his health was sorted. But secondly, Mackay Lemon was wild in the team interviews. I have heard the stories firsthand. I cannot repeat them because I do not want to get in trouble. However, they are really weird. And if this is the sort of behavior he's going to be putting out there with teams, then this is a little bit concerning. It's going to be hard for him to kind of fit in with NFL players with the type of behavior he was exhibiting. Having said that, might have just been with the teams that I heard about it from, so I'm not going to say any more on that. All I will say is that this isn't the greatest pick. I would have rather see the Eagles move up and take an O-lineman. I thought they jumped the Steelers to go and do that, but instead they jumped the Steelers to take Lemon. I do know the Steelers like Lemon as well. I mean, it's kind of a need, but with AJ Brown leaving, but they still have Hollywood Brown. They still have Devonta Smith. They've gone okay with two receivers for a while now, so I don't think this was really a necessary way of doing things. Would have loved to have seen them take Ian Atchell, which I thought was going on, and I mocked them in both of my drafts. Didn't work out that way. He went to the Steelers. Love this for the Steelers. Steelers definitely needed to be addressing the O-line, and they made an excellent decision here. For the Steelers, taking a very talented guy who can slide in right now and play at right tackle or into one of the guards spots and then slide out and bring Broderick Jones inside. Either of those things would work. Anything they can do to protect Old Man Rodgers was a good choice. In at 22, and this probably would have been an acceptable spot for Akeem Mesidor, except you still had Keldrick Falk on the board, and he is a clearly superior player. The other issue is the Chargers don't really need an edge rusher. They've got two sufficient edge rushers as it is. They need interior guys. And there were two good interior guys on the board in Peter Woods and Caden McDonald. So I don't understand why they went Mesidor here. I know that he can slide inside a little bit, but do not like this pick. He's also an older player, and I don't think the Chargers are really set up to strike at this very moment. So would have loved to have seen them go Falk, but it's at least a passable call here because he's going in roughly the right range, and he's at least a position they kind of need. In at 23, and a guy who rose throughout the process, Malachi Lawrence. He's someone that I heard spoken about with the Patriots and guys like that towards the end of the round, but I did hear very close to the draft that Lawrence was someone the Cowboys liked, but I'd also heard they really liked Falk, and I thought with both available, Falk would be the guy they took. In fact, I mocked Falk to them in the huddle mock, so I was very surprised when they went with Lawrence instead. Trading down, however, was a good move, did get some extra draft capital there, and still took a pretty good player, a good speed rusher, even though I personally think Eze Ruaku kind of does that same thing, so I would have liked to have seen the bigger guy in Falk. Still giving him a B, though. It is a clear need. In at 24, and this is really annoying because I think it was obvious they were going wide receiver here. I'd heard some stuff about Casey Concepcion around some character issues, heard that he might well fall and just crack the first round potentially. And I'd heard that the Browns really like Denzel Boston. As it turns out, Boston slid, and it's Concepcion that got selected. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. But I do feel like the Browns need a number one receiver, which is more a Boston and to an extent a Cooper. And instead they get a guy who's a kick returner and kind of a speed guy. I don't really know that they can build their offense around him. So maybe this is a starting point, and then they get someone better later on in the second round or even on day 3. Or more likely sometime next year. If that's the case, then I think looking back, this might turn out to be an okay pick, but I personally would have preferred Boston. Going into the last quarter, and it is Dylan Thieneman finally coming off the board. I had them taking McNeil Warren. I would have drafted that pretty harshly because I don't particularly like McNeil Warren, but I do like Thieneman. I feel like you're getting good value here. Whenever we're mocking someone in the late 20s, if you get a player at 25, you've done a pretty good job. Having said that, I think that Thieneman was a little bit early in those late 20s, but I do like the value here. It's a clear need. Would have liked to have seen him go edge rusher, but I didn't love any of the edge rushers on the board outside Falk, and I don't know that he fits them quite as well as he does with a lot of the other teams we've talked about. So if Falk wasn't there, this probably would have been an A+, but I would have preferred Falk given he was available. But taking Thieneman makes sense. He's a clear need. Good player, great value. In at 26, and I don't understand what the Texans are doing. There's no way anyone else was trying to get their hands on Keelan Rutledge. There's a heap of guard options here. They easily could have taken Basontas. Also possible they could have taken Lomu, or he is more of a natural tackle. Rutledge does fill a need at least, which is why this is not a total fail, but I expected them more to be going in the other direction. I think Blake Miller would have been the nice pick for them, and that's who I and a lot of other people have been mocking to them. Maybe when some of their preferred options are gone, they only have one guy left, they feel like they need to jump up and get him over the 49ers, who you do know are going to address the O-line probably. So I guess that kind of makes sense, but I still hate it. Hate this pick, not happy with it. In at 27, Chris Johnson to the Dolphins. Very annoyed about this because I nearly had him going to the Dolphins in my huddle report one, but I did hear some stuff about Peter Woods going to the Dolphins, and so I kind of hedged my bets and gave Johnson to the other team that needs a quarterback in the Seahawks, and that cost me a top 3 finish. So we'll learn from that. Johnson, however, to the Dolphins, good pick, makes a lot of sense. Personally, I prefer Colton Hood, but I do know that the Dolphins can't continue to go ahead with a number 1 cornerback called Storm Duck. Wide receiver would have also been really nice here, but I feel like you can kind of build on that. I feel like you can get someone day 2. Possible that they'll get their hands on, maybe not a Denzel Boston, but certainly some of these guys like Chris Bell, who'll probably fall due to some health issues. Jeremy Bernard, for example. There are some options they can get on day 2, so I do think it makes sense to take the cornerback here. Johnson was ultimately the second cornerback off the board, so that's pretty good value at 27. Well done by the Dolphins, even though they did have to trade up to get him. I think that ultimately made sense. In at 28, and the Patriots get an absolute bargain. Did they need to trade up? Maybe. We don't really know what the 49ers were going to do. There was a threat that the 49ers were going to take Lomu. I think they probably did. I think they made the right move. Morgan Moses is aging, so getting a guy who can play at right tackle made a lot of sense. Lomu, talented player, played left tackle, funnily enough. One of the few guys that actually profiles as a true left tackle. And they're probably going to move him to right because they've got Will Campbell from last year. But makes sense. Was playing opposite Fanu, but was still very good last year. Was the guy that a lot of teams targeted because Fanu was so good, and he held up pretty well. So I do like this pick by the Patriots. It's an A for me. In at 29, and Peter Woods, this is a pretty good value pick, but it's not really a need. We talked earlier about all the needs the Chiefs have, and defensive tackle was not one of them. So I don't really understand why they're doing this here. I do understand they need someone next to Chris Woods, but this is the same type of player as, Chris Jones. This is the same type of player as Chris Jones, so this is more of a replacement nearly that they're going to cycle him with and get him to play next to guys like Tonga. Don't love this pick, but it's at least very good value because we talked about him going at 18, so getting him, a dozen picks later on is pretty good. In at 30, and also love this pick for the Jets, Omar Cooper, very good value here, coming up a few spots to make sure they get that 5th-year option, and also making sure that no other team snatches him away because there were a few sniffing around. A lot of people talking about Cooper potentially going at 60, and I never really thought that was likely because every report we had was that the Jets really liked him, but with this pick, so really good to see him go there. That really worked for me, and I think it's going to work for the Jets. Excellent value. The only reason it's not an A+ or an A is firstly because they needed to trade up, and I think they were going to need to anyway, but you can't give someone an A+ when you need to go up and get a player that might have fallen to you. But the second major issue is that I actually prefer Denzel Boston to them. But Cooper's fine. Can't complain with that. Add him to Sadiq, and also when you get Bailey, the Jets are clearly the top team out of day 1 of the draft with a big, excellent haul. The other team that's done very well here, Keldrick Falk, finally going at 31 to the Titans. This nearly makes up for that annoying Tate pick, but no, I'm still salty with the Titans. Look, Falk could have easily gone at 12, and we would have gone, yeah, okay, sure, I guess so. He was the next edge rusher off the board. So getting him at 31 is insane value. This is probably the best value pick in the draft. Very talented player, good size. Really like what they've done here. Honestly, if the options were Tate and Falk or Reese, who was the other possibility, or potentially Styles, and whatever wide receiver you're getting here, Denzel Boston, I think I probably go Tate and Falk. So well done, Titans. Good pick here. Last pick, little bit of a wild one. I do know Charlie Campbell was talking about this happening for a while, but I would have liked to have seen them go Colton Hood here. It would have made so much more sense. Instead, they go the running back, Jadarian Price. Good player, but we haven't really seen him operate without Love in front of him, kind of softening up the offense. I see this all the time in the NFL, where the lead running back does most of the heavy lifting, and then they bring in the change of pace guy, and he looks excellent, ripping off 6-yard carries. And then all of a sudden, when he gets the opportunity to start, it's back to mediocrity again, because all of a sudden the the defense is switched on every time he's out there. Do fear that happening a little bit with Price. Also, definitely a little bit too late to be selling your Zach Charbonnet shares. Thankfully, I did last year. That's a bit of a tongue twister as well. Thankfully, I did that last week, but definitely not a player you're going to be able to trust anymore with Price coming in there for Seattle. I think they would have liked to have traded down for that. Plus, they're taking a running back who's not fantastic value here. That's why that's a B-. Still an okay deal, and I understand they might want that fifth option, but I think they probably could have gotten Price if they traded down half a dozen spots. Now, also got a couple of players who I mocked and didn't get selected. Colton Hood is one that I really would have liked to have seen go. Having said that, understandable that he didn't. Really is a reasonably weak cornerback class. Jamon McCoy also fell, of course, but we kind of knew that was coming. A lot of teams had just full-blown excluded him from their boards because of the injury issues, which is very sad given he was such a talented player. Caden McDonald also falling. That happens with defensive tackles. Teams have specific ideas of what they're looking for. McDonald's more that nose tackle kind of guy, so it makes sense the guys with a little bit of twitch, a little bit of rush potential in Woods and Banks went. So I can understand that. Denzel Boston was someone I really thought was going to go to the Browns or potentially even the Eagles. So surprising to see him drop out. At one stage, I even saw him mocked at 16 in some drafts. So that's a bit of a fall for him. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, not so much a surprise for me. I've been spruiking the under on the 2.5 safeties for a long time. Did have him in the huddle one because it felt like he was more likely to be selected than any other individual player. But ultimately moved him out because it just didn't feel likely that he was going to get his safeties always full. Finally, TJ Parker, who I slipped in. Very difficult to work out which edge rushers were going to be selected. Parker was a swing and a miss for me there. But honestly, pretty happy to get 28 players correct on both of those drafts. Most years you don't get that, so entirely happy with that. I'll be back with rookie rankings and dynasty rankings over the coming week or two once I've had time to do all the research. Plus, make sure you check me out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down if you've got any fantasy questions. Look forward to chatting to you guys next time. I hope you enjoy day 2 of the draft.